My name is Don Schaefer. I was born in Denver in 1948 and still living in the metro area.
Well, let's just kind of go to why you happened to go into the military first.
I always wanted to be in the military. I loved war movies. John Wayne was my hero. And I think maybe that was spawned by an uncle of mine who served in the Marine Corps during World War II. He was in the Marines. He served on Iwo Jima and several other campaigns in the Pacific. And I think that was my initial inspiration to join the Marines and go fight a war.
Did you ever talk to him about his experiences?
I did. In fact, nobody in the family really knew much about his experiences. And for some reason, he opened up to me. And he talked to me about it. And so I did get to know some of his experiences. And after he died, I filled in the rest of the family. I thought everybody knew. But he especially talked to me after the fact. When I came home from Vietnam, I was hospitalized at Fitzsimmons for an extended period of time, and he came out to visit me there and got a lot of insight into his experiences there. And I think maybe just a case of one veteran talking to another veteran, we shared something, and he opened up.
I'm just going to go back to you actually enlisted. Where did you go when you were first in the Marine Corps? When you enlisted?
Well, I enlisted and I went to San Diego, Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego for basic training. And from there I went through advanced infantry training, which is something that all Marines go through. All Marines are infantrymen first. And from there I was chosen to be a field radio operator. And I think it was because of my size. I was one of the larger guys in the unit. They put a radio on my back, and I went through field radio operator school, and I was itching to go to Vietnam, but that didn't happen. I got sent to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and was when I first checked in there, I got assigned to recon battalion, and did some recon training, just basic, because my primary MOS was radio operator. But I did go through jump school and UDT, underwater demolition, and scuba school, and a few other specialty schools for recon. And I kept volunteering, and finally my orders came through for Vietnam.
You finally got to Vietnam.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Were you looking forward to that?
I was, apprehensively, but I was in a hurry to get there. I joined the Marines right out of high school and volunteered for Vietnam. I was afraid I was going to miss my only chance to fight in a war. And I honestly thought that was my destiny. That's where I belonged. And I was almost excited when the war broke out. I might be able to get there. This is my lifetime. So, I was excited about going, scared to death, but not. I was afraid of what I would encounter. I never did have a fear of death. That was something that was a real reality in my mind, that I probably had a very good chance of dying on the battlefield. And I was good with that. It didn't bother me. I went to Vietnam in 1966, very early in the war. None of my instructors had been to Vietnam. Nobody had come home yet. We didn't have returning vets when I went through training. So they were trying to teach us out of textbooks and things they'd learned about jungle warfare from World War II. And early in a war, there weren't veterans, combat veterans, to train you to go. And that's the way it was in 1966. So we were very unprepared when we got there. The first groups that went over were coming home about that time, but none of them were in a training capacity yet. So I didn't meet combat veterans until I got to Vietnam.
Did that really put you in jeopardy over there right away?
It took a while. I got there, and there were experienced people there when I got there. I wasn't the first force there. we'd been fighting the war about a year and a half. So we had a lot of experienced people, and I moved into units that, wasn't all new kids. So I suspect it probably was a serious problem in 1965. But by the time I got there, there were experienced people there that they nurtured us, and we learned what we needed to learn on the job. What we learned in training really wasn't that relevant. I landed at Da Nang, and from there I was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division out of Quezon, which is pretty close to DMZ, and we saw combat on a regular basis. I think probably my 2nd or 3rd day, we got in a firefight, so it was pretty quick. People ask me if you're afraid or what emotions you have in a firefight. You don't have any emotions, and fear goes away, and training takes over. Adrenaline kicks in, and you do what you've been trained to do and what you know to do, and it's really not scary. The scary part is walking around all day, patrolling, knowing that battle could happen at any second. That's when I felt afraid of things, was the anticipation of this battle could happen at any minute. But once it happened, the rest of the world went away, and you just did what you needed to do and what you were trained to do.
So the Marine Corps really prepares you.
It does. When you say prepare, the Marine Corps brainwashes you into their way of thinking. That's all you can say. I mean, it's brainwashing. But somebody once asked, what makes a Marine such a good fighting force? Well, it's not the training you go through. It's not the knowledge you have. It's the state of mind. And that comes through brainwashing. You think you are the baddest person on the face of the earth, and you believe that. And all your actions are based on that. And it's more a state of mind than anything else. You learn blind obedience. As a young private, when the sergeant says take that hill, you take the hill. You don't stop and think, should we really be doing this? Or, I might get killed doing this. You just, okay, Sergeant, and take the hill. And I think that's part of what sets the Marines apart from other fighting forces. And as you get experience and get promoted, then you start taking on some of those things, and you start thinking for yourself and actually thinking for the unit rather than yourself. But as time goes by and you progress, that goes away, and then you're able to make decisions. But in the beginning, it's just pure blind obedience.
Did you move around quite a bit with your unit?
No. When I was with Recon, when I first got there, we did a lot of reconnaissance missions across the DMZ into North Vietnam, but our base was always at Dong Ha. And I left there and went to an engineering battalion. And we moved quite a bit because we were building McNamara's Wall. Now, if you're not familiar with that, McNamara's Secretary of Defense had this idea that, sort of like Donald Trump, we're going to build a strip across the DMZ, across the border between North and South Vietnam. We're going to make a mile-wide strip through the jungle. It was a dumb idea, and we got several miles, and somebody realized how dumb it was, that it wasn't going to be effective, and we abandoned it. But we were just, they spray the jungle with Agent Orange, and we'd go in a couple of days later with bulldozers and just push the trees back and make this strip. And it wasn't accomplished anything, but we were on the move then because we were marching our way down the DMZ. The biggest challenge I had being right next to DMZ was the fact that we couldn't cross it and win the war. It was really frustrating to know that, we're here. We can beat these people. In a matter of weeks, we can be in Hanoi and have this war over with. You felt pretty helpless at that point because, they had all these units that would run back across the DMZ and remobilize and get new supplies and then come back again. And we couldn't chase them, and we couldn't win the war. We realized that there's nothing to win. We're fighting a defensive war. There's no offense here. And we saw that on the DMZ, I think, more than most people did, that if we're not going to go on the offense, how are we going to win? What is there to win? The Viet Cong were the guerrilla warriors. They were sort of part-time. They lived in the villagers. Some of them probably lived amongst us. Farmer by day, fighter by night. They did a lot of hit-and-run things, set up a lot of booby traps, which are now called IEDs, but same thing. We had a lot of those they would set up, and they were more harassing than anything. They weren't equipped that well, and they weren't trained very well. They weren't so much of a military force. They were much of individuals. They weren't organized well. And then the North Vietnamese Army, a totally different ballgame. They were trained, equipped by Communist China. So they had the latest equipment. They had better weapons than we did, for the most part. They had very good training. They were good soldiers. That was an army to be reckoned with, as opposed to the Viet Cong, which was sort of a ragtag bunch. But they were pretty effective.
And when Tet happened, it was mostly the North Vietnamese Army that came across at that point, wasn't it?
Yes, the North Vietnamese Army had mobilized and worked their way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail into South Vietnam and infiltrated it. And the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, all of them participated in Tet. But it was one of the first times that people actually saw a good enemy, a formidable enemy that would stand their ground and fight you, and had the equipment and training to do it. There were even a few tanks up along the DMZ. We saw them. We never encountered them, but we could see across the DMZ. We saw some tanks. And that was pretty scary to see the tanks. And I thought to myself, how can these Viet Cong wander around with all the American tanks? I mean, it's scary to see one a mile away. It's a pretty imposing force. And then I went into a combined action unit, which was my primary service in Vietnam. And we were totally stationary then. We lived in a village and didn't move around at all.
Did you get to learn the language? Did you get to communicate with people in that way and become more integrated with them?
To be a Cat Marine, there's some requirements to be a Cat Marine. First, you had to have about 6 months combat experience, and you had to be willing to commit to 6 months in the Combined Action Program. It was all volunteer. There were some posters hanging up around the area that said, would you like to live in the same place? Would you like to have a tent over your head? Would you like to have a cot to sleep on? Hot meals? Sign me up. And then we got sent to Da Nang to CAP school. And there we learned some rudimentary Vietnamese. We learned customs, traditions. We even learned to play a few board games, Vietnamese board games, and just to prepare us for that. So we did have some very basic Vietnamese language skills. And we'd been there long enough, Americans had been there long enough, the Vietnamese picked up some words, and between the little English they knew and the little Vietnamese we learned, we could communicate, but you can always communicate anywhere in the world. I've traveled all over the world and don't necessarily speak the language, but you can communicate if you try. Sometimes it's a giant game of charades, but you can communicate.
Were you attacked quite a bit?
The village wasn't attacked a lot, but we did patrols, and we saw action regularly on our patrols. The whole idea of a combined action unit, a little history or basis of what it is, it's when you take a squad of Marines, essentially 13 people, and you put them in a village. And it's a pacification program. These villages are picked because of their strategic location, and we wanted them to side with us rather than side with the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. So that places units in, and our main goal was to keep them or convert them to our way of thinking. We went in, we did some civic action programs. The village we went into, the well had been poisoned, so we had resources available to us. Rather than just getting shovels and digging another shallow well, we called the Seabees, and they came in and made a real well. And that's part of what we did to help the people. Their little schoolhouse had been bombed. We built a new building for the schoolhouse. So we did all these things trying to help them and to gain their trust. And then we took the PF's Popular Forces. Now this was sort of like a local militia in the village, mostly older teenagers, like 15, 16 years old. Because everybody else, all the men of real fighting age, were gone. I mean, they'd either joined the Viet Cong or been drafted by South Vietnamese Army. So we'd take these guys, we would train them in firearms, we'd train them in infantry tactics, and then arm them and teach them how to patrol so the village could take care of itself. That was the goal. We'd take a Marine Fire Team, which is basically 3 people, and pair them up with a dozen, maybe 15 PFs. And that was our fighting unit. We would rotate, we had the 4 teams, we'd rotate on a 4-day basis, and we'd do night patrols or ambushes with 3 Marines and a dozen PFs. Then another day we would do a daytime patrol.
Could you call for helicopters? Could you call back for artillery support or anything that might
Yes, we could.
alleviate the situation?
Absolutely. We had a lot of resources at our disposal. I mentioned earlier about the engineers and the Seabees that would come in and help us with some of the construction projects. They're incredible. They do the heavy construction projects, like building buildings and building bridges, permanent structure bridges. Now, the Marine Corps is amphibious, and they do their own. They have bridge companies with the combat engineers, and they go out and put temporary bridges in place and repair bridges, but they don't construct permanent things. They don't build airstrips. I mean, that's what the Seabees do. They're construction people. And so they have a totally different role than like a combat engineer unit would have. And they had great supplies. Anything you needed, you could steal from the Seabees. Midnight requisition, maybe is a better term. And I suspect they knew we were doing it. Marine Corps, we were very undersupplied. We had just the basics, and if we wanted something a little nicer, we could always find it at the CB base in Dong Ha. A generator, for example. And we also had firepower that we could use. We didn't do it much because we were a little more discriminate in who we killed than maybe your line unit was, because we knew the people. We were not going to call an airstrike in when we know there are civilians that are our friends around. So we didn't use it indiscriminately.
That had to be quite an experience living in the village.
It was. The Combined Action Marines, CAP Marines, we don't have share the same perspective of Vietnam as most Vietnam veterans do. We didn't. It wasn't some ambiguous enemy out there, and I think most regular infantry troops, they don't see the enemy as people, and that's part of what you have to do in your mind, is to create this subhuman category of life that otherwise, you gotta go crazy thinking you're murdering people, and that wasn't new with Vietnam. There were gooks, you call them whatever you didn't want to call them people. But that wasn't unique. If you ask a European World War II veteran that fought in Europe, he never killed a German gentleman. He killed the Kraut. He killed a Nazi. Or if they were fighting in the Pacific, they never killed a Japanese man. They killed a Jap or a Nip. I mean, it's a state of mind. Now, that's the typical experience. Now, when you go into the Combined Action Program, you live with them. They become human again. So I think we have a much different perspective than your typical infantryman. I would go to the VFW when I first got out, and all the guys there were talking about the Gooks, and and I just that wasn't the way I felt. So I quit doing that. I don't want to go there, but I have a whole different attitude. That's changed over the years, but early I shied away from Vietnam veterans because of their attitudes, and it was an appropriate attitude at the time. I'm lucky I got to get to know the people.
Was there an actual name for the village that you were in?
Probably. Do I know it? Absolutely not.
You were just there.
I was there. And I couldn't even find it on a map, I don't think. The village itself was probably 100 people, give or take. And then the outlying area, our area of responsibility with other hamlets and farmers was probably a total of a couple of thousand. We were located in the mountains in northern and South Vietnam, and very heavy woods, but I really wouldn't classify it as a jungle. But not a lot of open spaces. Now, the villages are made up of little hamlets, so it's spread out quite a bit. So we patrolled the area, trying to just keep us safe during the daytime. And then another day, we would stand guard in the particular village we were in, where the village elders were. And another day, we'd do what's called a medcap. We'd take our Navy corpsman, our medic out, and we had locations set up to where the local Vietnamese could come get treated. Anything from combat injuries, stray shrapnel, to farming accidents, to disease. And there again, that was part of the pacification process. And every day we'd go out, and we had 3 places we set up med caps, and different times of the day. And the villagers knew where we were going, and they'd all show up there. And the Viet Cong never really messed with it. We had the PFs and the squad, the fire team Marines, but we didn't see combat on that mission. I guess the Viet Cong knew we were doing good that day, and we didn't see combat. They never attacked us. We knew they were all around, of course, but that was sort of a free day. And then you start all over again doing the same thing.
How close was the enemy to where you were living? Did they just kind of lay low? Were they in tunnels, or did they just kind of hide out in the woods? And
there were no tunnels. The Viet Cong, they were openly lived there. I mean, they were farmers by day and Viet Cong by night. And they lived amongst us. There were some hardcore Viet Cong that actually, found places to hide. We never found any tunnels in the area I was in. It was a little rockier area, and being in the mountains. We came across a couple of them, but not the kind of tunnel complexes that they found around Saigon and Cu Chi. Nothing to that magnitude, just because of the geology of the area.
Living in a village, were they all loyal to the American forces, to the Marines?
No. There were spies. We got overrun, and the first RPG that came in hit our communications bunker, and then pretty quick after that, the ammunition bunker got hit. I mean, it was mapped out. They knew exactly what they were doing, and you know, every once in a while you'd see somebody, one of the Vietnamese people, sort of walking around the compound, and you watch him for a little bit, and he's counting steps. He's pacing it off. So, you know, most of them were loyal, but there were some that weren't.
What would you do with somebody that you suspected might be a spy or might be a Viet Cong living in your area?
There were some ARVN forces, the Army of the Republic of South Vietnam, in the area, and we would turn them over to the ARVNs for interrogation. They interrogated in ways that we couldn't do because of the Geneva Convention. I can remember watching 3 prisoners go up in a helicopter and one fall out of the helicopter, and they gained a lot of intelligence from the other 2. Now, those are things we couldn't do, and obviously that we weren't doing. So, but we turned them over to the ARVNs. We were part of it. We weren't physically involved, but we arranged the situation, and then we could walk away with clean hands. We didn't torture anybody. We just delivered people to be tortured, but somehow that was okay.
It was that kind of war, wasn't it?
It was. You didn't really know who the enemy was, and it was the whole idea of guerrilla warfare was new at that point. Got to tell you an aside here. I'd been in Vietnam probably 3 weeks, and I went up to Sergeant and said, "Sergeant, when are we going to find these guerrillas that we're fighting?" And I'm thinking, ape guerrilla. I was very not uneducated, but very naive when I joined the military. And I thought we were fighting these apes. I didn't realize there was another kind of guerrilla. You know, that's how naive most of us were. I had no idea where Vietnam was. I knew it was over there somewhere. But it was long after I came home that I actually took out a map or globe and actually found out where it was. That was just not something that we ever had the opportunity to learn.
Was this going on all through Vietnam, with people like you?
It started early in the war. Everything changed during the Tet Offensive of 1968. After that, the Cap units became mobile, and they would go into a village and just help them do something and then leave. So they didn't have the relationships that we did early. And it did continue on through the war with a mobile Cap unit, and I really don't know much about that. I was long gone before that happened, but it was resurrected in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's still in use today. They actually got some Cap survivors to help them resurrect the program. So it's a tactic that the Marines have used and been pretty effective. The Army had a much larger concept. Now you got to understand that in Vietnam, nobody trusted officers. I mean, that's just the way it was. Senior NCOs and officers, they were, a large number of them were corrupt, and the perception of the local people was everybody's corrupt. That's just the way it was. So it failed. They went in with a large unit with a colonel in charge, and it failed. It fell flat on its face. And the commander of the 3rd Marine Division said, that's not a bad idea, but let's do it on a level where we can gain that trust. So they sent a squad out with a sergeant, an E5 in charge. No officers involved. In the rear, there are officers involved with the strategic part of things, but in the villages themselves, a Sergeant E5 was the highest rank. And so it was on a much smaller scale, and it succeeded.
Did you interact much with the other units in the area, not just the CBs, but maybe other line Marine units or Army units in the area?
Not in the Cap unit. They would come through, but we always knew they were coming. This was our territory. and nobody came into our territory without us knowing it. And when they came through, most of your units they didn't do routine patrols in the same area. They were on the move from one place to another, so they would pass through. But as far as interaction goes, there really wasn't any, and there weren't very many repeat visitors.
Also, the fact that you were a squad, that very few men working together
Yeah.
closely. Was that different from a lot of the other units?
No, you have that squad in every unit. Ours just happened to be isolated, but the Marine Corps squad is interesting. When my son joined, he was in the Marines stationed at Camp Pendleton, and he got married to his high school girlfriend in Las Vegas, and he got a pass to go to Vegas for 4 days, and it happened to be over President's Day weekend, Valentine's Day. His whole squad tried to get a pass, and they couldn't get a pass, so they all went AWOL. I mean, they were going to be at the wedding. That's just the way Marine squads are, and they all went, and that's the way Marine Corps squads are. And he was in a regular infantry unit.
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Absolutely. Yes. And that goes back to the Marines it's a state of mind. I'm a Marine. I'm currently not on active duty, but I'm still a Marine. My son later joined the Army after he got out of the Marines. The Iraq War broke out in 2003, and he was 32 years old, and the Marine Corps didn't want him. The blind obedience thing, they decided they didn't want somebody that really had some life experience. So he joined the Army and served in Iraq in the Army. He was stationed down in Savannah, Georgia, and I went down to see him one time. He said, "Dad, let's drive out to Parris Island," which is a Marine Corps boot camp on the East Coast in South Carolina, about an hour and a half away from where he lived. And I said, "What do you want to go up there for?" He said, "I want to buy some PT gear, some sweatshirts." And I said, "Todd, you're in the Army." And he said, "Oh no, I'm a Marine. I may be currently on active duty in the Army, but I'm still a Marine." I know going over when I did, our attitude was we're going to win this war. And late 1967, I started seeing guys coming in, and their attitude was, "I want to survive this and go home." A totally different mindset. So when you have that, that's a big thing right there. We had no drugs. I mean, that wasn't an issue for us. Later in the war, it became an issue. But if you're coming with the mindset of, "We're not going to win this. I got sent here, and I just want to survive this and go home," I can see why those kinds of problems arose.
No matter where you went, you were outnumbered, though, weren't you?
Always outnumbered. But we're Marines. We're brainwashed. We're the baddest people on the face of the earth. That's not a big deal. Until late January 1968, we hear about these two divisions, and that's when we decided to leave our village. It was, well, we're used to being outnumbered, and we don't mind that, but this is starting to look like thousands to one ratios. And I may be bad, but I'm not that bad. We always, in the Combined Action Unit, we may have had the same number of forces but as the Viet Cong we encountered, but the majority of ours were teenagers. I was wounded at the beginning of the Tet Offensive in 1968 on February 2nd.
That must have been some battle you were in.
It was. We got physically overrun, and I was left for dead. And we had abandoned our village and went to our headquarters. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew that there were like a couple of divisions of North Vietnamese regulars amassing just north of the demilitarized zone. So we said, we're not going to stay here. One reason was we won't be a speed bump when they get here. I mean, we're not going to do anything strategically. And more important, I think, was if we had a battle, a lot of innocent civilians were going to die. And the best thing we could do, and they were our friends. We knew them because we lived with them. And we decided the best thing we could do was to leave and not have that battle take place. And then our headquarters compound got overrun. And I ended up with a bayonet through my back, came out my stomach, and 2 bullet wounds in the arm, and 3 AK-47 rounds through my leg. And then we called in artillery on top of our compound, an airburst artillery, because we were being overrun. I didn't get the word, and I still have 62 scars on my back from shrapnel that penetrated my flak jacket. And my back was broken. And that happened on February 2nd, 1968, right at the very beginning of the Tet Offensive.
How quickly did they get some medics, somebody in to help you?
A medic came in and worked on me in the field, but it was the middle of the night, and they weren't flying at that point, at night. So he worked on me. In fact, my spleen was ruptured. The bayonet went through my spleen, and he took my spleen out in the field, a corpsman. And he wasn't sure what it was, but he looked at me and said, "You're bleeding to death internally. We got to do something." So he cut me open. I had one finger still attached to this hand. The rest of them were just sort of flopping around, but it was just he and I held the incision open, and he said, "I think this is your spleen, and I think you can live without it, but you're bleeding to death. It's got 2 huge holes in it." So he removed it and just tied off the blood vessels and packed me full of gauze, didn't close me back up, and put this thing in a plastic bag and sent it to the hospital with me. And I got to the hospital in Cameron Bay, and a few days later, a doctor came in and said, "What the hell happened to you?" And I related the story, and he said, "That corpsman saved your life." He said, "That is your spleen." He held up the bag and says, "This is your spleen, and yes, you can live without it. But more importantly, with your blood volume when you first got here to the hospital and the holes in this, you were within minutes of bleeding out." So that was, I lay there for quite a while, I think. Time's really distorted. But I think I lay there till daybreak, and everything started about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm guessing the battle lasted maybe an hour. And then I laid there till daybreak for a medevac helicopter to come in and get me. I got medevaced home and spent quite a bit of time at Fitzsimmons when it was an Army hospital. And I was released from the hospital and medically retired in May 19th, 1970, about 27 months later. So I came home at the very beginning of the Tet Offensive.
So you spent a lot of time recovering.
Yes. And I still have issues that I have to go in, a little surgery here and there, and things don't always work out the best. My hand was broken in 22 places, and in 1990, I think it was. It wasn't the day my son joined the Marine Corps and got sworn in. I had surgery on my hand to have it rebuilt and some artificial joints and some tendon transfers, because I got to the point where my thumb wasn't laying up with my fingers anymore. Everything drifted off this way, and they had to pull everything back over by transferring some tendons from my thumb to the fingers. That was in 1990, and most recently in 2010, I had some shrapnel removed from my foot that was really starting to bother me. So it's ongoing. I think that maybe being in the hospital was one of the best things that could have happened to me. I was around other people in the same situation. We didn't have to deal with the protesters, and we didn't have to deal with all that. And I think maybe I was fortunate. I had one bad experience. I had a friend that I went to high school with. In fact, there were 3 of us that hung out together. One of them joined the Marines, the buddy plan with me, and the third one went to college. He went up to Colorado Teachers College, which is now UNC, and I kept calling him I wanted to see him, and he wouldn't answer the phone, and his mom was making excuses for him, and finally he did answer the phone, and I said, "Bill, I want to see you." And he said, "Okay, I'll be over." So he came over and stood at the foot of my bed, and he looked me right in the eyes and said, "You are an effing baby killer. I never want to see you again." and he turned around and walked out. That was my one experience. I found out later he was involved in the peace movement and the demonstrations, and it was a time when people went different routes. And never heard from him, never seen him, never tried to contact him again. That was my one experience. But there are a lot of guys that face that regularly when they got home. And that's why we sort of went into hiding. I did not own a baseball cap that said Marines on it, a shirt, anything. I have a tattoo that says Marines Caisson on it. I kept that hid. I mean, I wore long sleeve shirts or had a bandage over it for quite a while because I didn't want people to know. And that's how I worked with these people for years, and all of us were that way. We didn't know about each other.
When we first started doing interviews, which has been at least 12 years ago, people weren't opening up until that time.
That's right. I never talked about my experiences in Vietnam until, the mid 90s.
Did you find that with your other friends?
I didn't really associate with other veterans over the years, and after Vietnam, nobody really opened up that they were a Vietnam veteran. Just with the treatment of us that was going on, we sort of hid the fact. And I've learned later that I worked for 20 years with several other Vietnam veterans, and never knew it. That's just the way we were back then. You got to talk about it. You can't keep it bottled up inside, and we did for a lot of years, collectively, Vietnam veterans. I think I opened up initially with a school teacher. There was a friend of mine, my wife was working in the public schools at the time, and she wanted me to come talk to her class. And I said no, I didn't want to deal with it. She kept bugging me, and finally I said, okay, I'll come this one time if you'll leave me alone after this. So I went in and talked to her class, and when I walked out of the classroom, I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. It was just very therapeutic for me. And I've continued doing that. I have about a half dozen teachers around the metro area that I go talk to different classes about the Vietnam experience. When I do classes in high schools and do lectures and open up to questions, somebody will come up and say, well, my grandpa said something totally different than you. Is he lying? Well, no, he's not. There's a lot of facets of the Vietnam War. When were you there? Early in the war, late in the war? That means a lot. And then the other part about the war was I lived in the mountains. We worked there. Some people were in dense jungles. Some people were in the city in Saigon. So a completely different kind of warfare. I work at the Colorado State Veterans Home on the Fitzsimmons campus, and I do armed security there. And luckily, my job's pretty boring. And when you do security, that's what you want, is to be bored. So I get to spend a lot of time talking to the veterans out there and learning about their experiences, and it's very rewarding. I love my job. Now, these guys are talking about it because they're in a shared experience, and they're with other veterans. A lot of World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, and a couple of Vietnam veterans, and I think there may be one there from somewhere in the Mideast. I don't know if it was Iraq or Afghanistan. But it's a real rewarding job just to learn their experiences and learn what some of these people did. And we have one there that was a B-29 pilot in the Pacific, and to talk to him about his experiences was just incredible. And another one that was General Eisenhower's aide in Europe. And, talk to these guys. It's incredible. And even if you didn't know them on active duty, at my job, I'm a lot closer to the Marines that are residents there than I am the others. I mean, there's that bond. It surfaces when you meet a Marine on the street. You always stop and talk to him if he's wearing a baseball cap or a T-shirt or something. That's just what you do.
They'll open up to you because you have combat.
I think so. that seems to be, when you get that shared bond, people do open up a little better.
And that covers the whole spectrum of things from World War II, as you said.
That's right. I think we're losing them pretty fast. Even there, you see the World War II veterans are getting, it's a smaller population every day.
Did you ever have a chance to go back?
No, I've thought about it. I've even started researching it and trying to make plans. And first, I wanted closure, and then I realized there would be no closure because the Vietnam today is not the Vietnam that I was in. So there wouldn't be any closure. The thing I'd like to go back for is the people, and I don't know if they're the same or not. And the other thing is the landscape. It was an absolutely beautiful country before we destroyed it. Rice paddies and jungles. It was like postcard pictures. A beautiful country. Of course, we bombed everything, but the jungle has a way of reclaiming itself. And from what I understand, from some reading I've done, it's back to a pretty country again. It's been 40 years.
Have you been in contact with any of the guys in the squad that you were on?
Two of them. We have one of them we met. I was on vacation in the Chicago area, and he lived in Ohio, so we found a meeting spot in the middle and met for lunch. I've talked to another one, but none of us really want to get together for a reunion or anything. It just isn't something we want to do yet. And I didn't remember Vietnam until, let's see, about 1995. I was barbecuing out in the backyard, and I got a phone call, and it says, "Sarge, is that you?" And it just sent chills down my bones. And it was one of my guys that was still alive. He'd been trying to find me. He had my my Marine Corps handbook, which is the Bible. It's the Bible for fighting tactics. And he'd found that and took it home with him and was trying to track me down. But you stamp everything in basic training with your name, and somehow your initial, first, middle, initial, and last name. Somehow I had transposed I got the letters backwards, and my initials are DL, and it was stamped LD. Never corrected it. Not want the DI to know I screwed up. You never corrected it. So he's trying to try to find me, and then one day he said, no, his name was Don. It's got to be DL. And he knew I was from Denver, so he started calling people in Denver. And he finally found me. I think he said he made a couple of dozen calls. And he finally found me. At that point, I didn't know what had happened to me. I had a story that I'd made up, not on purpose, but a story that I believed that matched all the scars I've got. And that's what I thought happened. Totally different location, different circumstances. Well, he started talking to me and put me in touch with another guy, started talking, and the pieces started coming back together about what happened to me during Tet. I didn't know that I didn't remember that until about 1995.
How much of that situation do you attribute to just the trauma of the situation that you've been in Tet?
Well, it's part trauma and part denial. I think there were things I didn't want to remember. Some of the memories haven't been good, and I didn't want to remember those. We've had a Marine Corps infantryman. He was a machine gunner, an M60 machine gun, and he was right down the wall from me in my compound, about 20 yards away. And my M16 actually blew up in my hand, and that's what happened to my hand. It exploded my hand. I think I got hit by an RPG. And I took off. I looked over, and he'd been in a lot of gunfire coming from his position. I looked over and he was wounded. He'd been shot in the head. He wasn't dead yet, but I ran over to his position, and that's when I took 3 AK-47 rounds through the leg. And I got there and took up firing the M60 machine gun. And that was a detail that I took a long time for that one to come back. And it came back because I was just doing some research on the internet. He was awarded the Medal of Honor that night for his actions that night. That's how intense the battle was. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that night. And that's how I put that piece together. So it comes and goes. But once I remember it, it's there. It doesn't come and go. It just comes periodically, and once the memory's there, I keep it. And I feel pretty good about my story now, because I've talked to the 2 other people that were there. So I actually feel pretty good that my story's accurate. I questioned that for a long time, because the first story I thought was accurate. I still don't remember a lot of things. And every once in a while something will pop into my mind and, damn, how did I forget that? Still to this day, things come up. I don't know if I blocked things out or what happened, but I don't remember names of people. The 3 of us that reconnected, I know their names, and they'll mention a name every now and then that, oh yeah. But you don't remember those things, you don't remember village names. I don't, anyway. Don't remember the details. It didn't bother me up until 1990 when my son joined the Marines. I didn't really have PTSD.
PTSD, has that affected you?
PTSD is big in my life. I receive counseling, not on a regular basis, and as need. I was seeing a therapist regularly, like weekly for a while. I'm taking a couple of meds, and it's under control. I don't have it like I did.
How long did it take before that was kind of diagnosed formally and you started getting that kind of counseling?
Oh, about 2000. My PTSD really kicked in when my son joined the Marines. I really didn't have much before that, and that was a little hard to deal with. And then again, when he went to Iraq, that was big. That was huge for PTSD. I wasn't sleeping. I kept having recurring dreams that I didn't want to sleep. And that's when I started really seeking counseling for PTSD, because I didn't sleep. I probably catnapped through the night, maybe got an hour or two's not good sleep, but sleep. So it was a big part of my life until I finally faced it and realized that, yeah, I've got a mental health issue. And it's treatable, and I'm good with it now. Specific events will trigger some things, but routinely I don't have anything. The mass shootings that take place, I feel some twinges, and I didn't sleep real good after the thing in Colorado Springs last Friday, but it was just that night, and it wasn't horrifying dreams. I just couldn't sleep. So my PTSD is way under control from what it was. I feel guilty. My guilt is that we fought a war and killed a generation of people, destroyed a country physically, and then left. If we hadn't been there, the war wouldn't have happened. I mean, the North Vietnam would have taken over, and it would be just like it is today, one country. So that's hard to live with. The Marine Corps traditions are tough. You've got all these traditions, the halls of Montezuma, and the shores of Tripoli, Iwo Jima, all those things. And then to deal with that and the history and say, yep, and I lost a war. That's tough to get over. And I'm still not over that. You know, I let down the Marine Corps tradition tremendously, because the Marines never lost anything till Vietnam.
But the Marines didn't lose that. That was our government.
Oh, absolutely. Logically, rationally, I know that. But there's still something down inside that says, you screwed up. You lost the war. And you're the first Marine that ever did. And I know that's not true. We haven't done too well lately. Couple of draws and a loss. Going back to Korea.
It's a terrible thing to have to go through.
It is, but if there was one good thing that came out of the Vietnam War, the American people learned from that experience. And our guys coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, they're not dealing with that. I think the American public said, wait a minute, let's protest and let's deal with the people that are making the decisions, not the soldier. And because of what happened in Vietnam. So I think that was the one positive that came out of Vietnam.